If we consider the very great difference between the point and the line, between the line and the surface and solid, for the sake of an example, the difference between the laws to which line and plane and surface, etc. are subjected, and the difference of phenomena possible in point, in line, in surface, we shall indeed come to understand how much of the new and inconceivable of the fourth dimension holds for us. As in the point, it is impossible to imagine the line and the laws of the line. As in the line, it is impossible to imagine the surface and the laws of the surface. As in the surface, it is impossible to imagine the solid and the laws of the solid. So in our space, it is impossible to imagine the body having more than 3 dimensions, and impossible to understand the laws of the existence of such a body. But studying the mutual relations between the point, the line, the surface, and the solid, we begin to learn something about the fourth dimension, of fourth dimensional space. We begin to learn what it can be in comparison with our 3-dimensional space, and what it cannot be. The last we learn first of all. And it is especially important because it saves us from many deeply inculcated illusions, which are very detrimental to right knowledge. We learn what cannot be in fourth dimensional space, and this permits us to set forth what can be there. In his book, The Fourth Dimension, Hinton makes an interesting statement concerning the method by which we may approach the problem of higher dimensions. He says, "Our space itself bears within it relations through which we can establish relations to other higher spaces. For within space are given the conception of point and line and plane, which really involve the relation of space to a higher space. Let us consider these relations within our space and see what conclusions we can derive from their investigation. We know that our geometry regards the line as a tracing of the movement of a point, the surface as a tracing of the movement of a line, and the solid as a tracing of the movement of a surface. On these premises, we put to ourselves this question: is it not possible to regard the fourth dimensional body as a tracing of the movement of a 3-dimensional body? But what is this movement, and in what direction? The point, moving in space and leaving the tracing of its movement. A line moves in a direction not contained in it, because in the point there is no direction whatsoever. The line moving in space and leaving the tracing of its movement, the surface, moves in a direction not contained in it, because moving in a direction contained in it, a line, will continue to be a line. The surface moving in space and leaving a tracing of its movement, the solid, moves also in a direction not contained in it. If it should move otherwise, it would remain always the surface. In order to leave a tracing of itself as a solid or 3-dimensional figure, it must set off from itself, move in a direction which in itself it has not. In analogy with all this, the solid, in order to leave as a tracing of its movement, the fourth dimensional figure, a hypersolid, shall move in a direction not confined in it, or in other words, it shall come out of itself, set off from itself, move in a direction which is not present in it. Later on it will be shown in what manner we shall understand this. But for the present, we can say that the direction of the movement on the fourth dimension lies out of all those directions which are possible in a three-dimensional figure. We consider the line as an infinite number of points, the surface as an infinite number of lines, the solid as an infinite number of surfaces. In analogy with this, it is possible to consider that it is necessary to regard a fourth-dimensional body as an infinite number of three-dimensional bodies, and fourth-dimensional space as an infinite number of three-dimensional spaces. Moreover, we know that the line is limited by points, that the surface is limited by lines, and the solid is limited by surfaces. It is possible that a four-dimensional body is limited by three-dimensional bodies. Or is it possible to say that the line is the distance between 2 points, the surface the distance between 2 lines, the solid between 2 surfaces? Or again, that the line separates 2 points or several points from one another, for a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points, and the surface separates 2 or several lines from each other, that the solid separates several surfaces from one another, as the cube separates 6 flat surfaces from one another, its faces. The line binds several separate points into a certain whole. The surface binds several lines into a certain whole. Quadrilateral, the triangle. The solid binds several surfaces into a certain whole, the cube, the pyramid. Is it possible that fourth-dimensional space is the distance between a group of solids, separating these solids, yet at the same time binding them into some, to us, unconceivable whole, even though they seem to be separate from one another? Moreover, we regard the point as a section of a line, the line as a section of a surface, the surface as a section of a solid. By analogy, it is possible to regard the solid, the cube, sphere, pyramid, as a section of a four-dimensional body, and our entire three-dimensional space as a section of a four-dimensional space. If every three-dimensional body is the section of a fourth-dimensional one, then every point of a three-dimensional body is the section of a four-dimensional line. It is possible to regard an atom of a physical body not as something material, but as an intersection of a four-dimensional line by the plane of our consciousness. The view of a three-dimensional body as the section of a four-dimensional one leads us to the thought that many, for us, separate bodies may be the sections of parts of one four-dimensional body. A simple example will clarify this thought. If we imagine a horizontal plane intersecting the top of a tree and parallel to the surface of the earth, then upon this plane, the sections of branches will seem separate and not bound to one another. Yet in our space, from our standpoint, these are sections of branches of one tree, comprising together one top nourished from one root, casting one shadow. Or here's another interesting example expressing the same idea given by Mr. Ledbetter, the theosophical writer, in one of his books. If we touch the surface of a table with our fingertips, then upon the surface will just be 5 circles. And from this plain presentment, it is impossible to construe any idea of the hand and of the man to whom this hand belongs. Upon the table's surface will be 5 separate circles. How from them is it possible to imagine a man with all the richness of his physical and spiritual life? It is impossible. Our relation to the four-dimensional world will be analogous to the relations of that consciousness which sees 5 circles upon the table, to a man. We just see fingertips. To us, the fourth dimension is inconceivable. We know that it is possible to represent a three-dimensional body on a plane. That it is possible to draw a cube, a polyhedron, or a sphere. This will not be a real cube or a real sphere, but the projection of a cube or a sphere on a plane. We may conceive of the three-dimensional bodies of our space somewhat in the nature of images in our space, of to us incomprehensible four-dimensional bodies. The noted mathematician Riemann understood that when higher dimensions of space are in question, time, by some means, translates itself into space. And he regarded the material atom as the entrance of the fourth dimension into three-dimensional space. In one of his books, Hinton writes very interestingly about surface tensions. The relationship of a surface to a solid, or of a solid to a higher solid, is one which we often find in nature. A surface is nothing more nor less than the relation between two things. Two bodies touch each other. The surface is the relationship of one to the other. If our space is in the same correlation with higher space as is the surface to our space, then it may be that our space is really the surface, that is, the place of contact of two higher dimensional spaces. It is a fact worthy of notice that in the surface of a liquid, different laws obtain from those which hold throughout the mass. There is a whole series of facts which are grouped together under the name of surface tensions, which are of great importance in physics, and by which the behavior of the surfaces of liquids is governed. And it may well be that the laws of our universe are the surface tensions of a higher universe. If the surface be regarded as a medium lying between two bodies, then indeed it will have no weight, but will be a powerful means of transmitting vibrations. Moreover, it would be unlike any other substance, and it would be impossible to get rid of it. However perfect a vacuum be made, there would be in this vacuum just as much of this unknown medium, i.e. of that surface, as there was before. Matter would pass freely through this medium. Vibrations of this medium would tear asunder portions of matter, and involuntarily the conclusion would be drawn that this medium was unlike any ordinary matter. These would be very difficult properties to reconcile in one and the same substance. Now, is there anything in our experience which corresponds to this medium? Do we suppose that the existence of any medium through which matter freely moves, which yet, by its vibrations, destroys the combinations of matter? Some medium which is present in every vacuum, however perfect, which penetrates all bodies, is weightless, and yet can never be laid hold of. The substance which possesses all these qualities is called the ether. The properties of the ether are a perpetual object of investigation in science. But taking into consideration the ideas expressed before, it would be interesting to look at the world, supposing they were not in it, but on the ether, where the ether is the surface of contact of two bodies of higher dimension. Hinton here expresses an unusually interesting thought and brings the idea of the ether nearer to the idea of time. The materialistic or even the energetic understanding of contemporary physics of the ether is perfectly fruitless. A dead-end sighting. For Hinton, the ether is not a substance, but only a surface, the boundary of something, but of what? Again, not that of a substance, but the boundary, the surface, the limit of one form of receptivity, and the beginning of another. In one sentence, the walls and fences of the materialistic dead-end siding are broken down, and before our thoughts open wide horizons of regions unexplored. Another place you see an unusual amount of unexplainable activity is the living biofilm around the Earth. From the analogies scattered about through these pages, the basic pattern is a dimension above the one you're considering is conceived of as emotion. And what I'm getting at here is human beings have three-dimensional perception. And what we're seeing is not the real world. And the fourth dimension is the next one up for us, and there is a fifth and sixth. So using these same analogies, the three-dimensional objects that we see are individual points, like a point in geometry that could be extended to become a line. Well, the three-dimensional object or objects could be extended to become a continuous line of three-dimensional objects in the fourth dimension. And right now we perceive that as motion, and mostly in the motions of the planets, the spinning of the sun, the spinning of the planets, the orbiting of the planets, the turning of the galaxy. All this is motion to our 3D perceptions, but actually is a no motion in the fourth dimension. So taking individual objects that we see here as points extending out on a line in the fourth dimension, you would have a point, an individual object, becoming points on a line in the fourth dimension. If you move the line in the fourth dimension, you get the fifth dimension, or a plane in the fifth dimension, and if you move the plane in the fifth dimension, you get a sixth-dimensional solid. And using the premise that the incorrect or partial sensing of the higher dimension gives a movement, which is actually not a movement. The reality of this universe's condition is it's not moving. Everything is in the present. There never was a past. There will not be a future. Everything is now. And the limiting factor is our three-dimensional sensors inside of a meat body. This kind of thinking is as forward and revolutionary as when people thought the earth was flat and somebody said no, it's a sphere. And they used to believe that the sun revolved around the earth, and then people said, well, the earth actually revolves around the sun. And now we have this more ancient concept that nothing's moving anywhere. And all that there is consciousness. Improperly perceiving an environment that is an illusion. And I've said many times, trying to get this idea out there, this universe is a game created for the purpose of one being who split himself into millionies of little beings. Could enjoy playing this game. And this game is headed for shutdown. And the future, in quotation marks, for mankind is not avoiding mass global warfare at the hands of psychotics, but and then if we win that, space travel out into the universe full of galaxies. Space itself is an illusion. Space itself was the first idea of a creation, which was the creation of space and a point of view and a place into which action could be inserted. And it's gone on from there. From the erection of the first elementary particles that were placed out into the imaginary space to view. To what we have now is a bunch of sleeping consciousnesses living with a three-dimensional perception in a six-dimensional matrix, trying to figure out why the thing doesn't work well for them. And I think that the turning point that's mentioned now, end of days, Mayan calendar, biblical prophecy, that the change is not what people think it might have been. It's not an automatic ascension of people to a higher level, because this thing puts the physical universe at cause, and the kind of people who back up that kind of thinking say this is a spiritual evolution, not a physical one. Then why are you saying that the cause of the spiritual revolution is caused by the weight and powers of the spinning galaxies? The only way to reconcile that is to say that there is a God doing that through the medium of the physicality of the supposed galaxies, the illusion of galaxies. This concept is called the via. You can't deal with it directly, so you need to have a way of doing it that you can accept. like having a ritual to do something rather than admitting it that you have the power to just do it. So it's going to be a hard row to hoe to change the materialistic conception of 6 billion sleeping beings in meat bodies, and another 654 billion beings without bodies, that we're going to stop the onrush of physical science and materialism and teach this reality. And it is by that means that we'll all get out of here and move on to playing the new game, which is already under construction and will be more fun than this game. So my role is to knock on your door and tell you this.